Hello, my name is Greg Massi, and this is episode number 63 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. Thanks again for coming back for another episode. This week, my guest is a returning guest, Mr. Terry Syrek. I think you can go back and listen to the original interview I did with him a while ago. Terry was probably the one teacher at the National Guitar Summer Workshop that all of us metal kids at the time looked up to more than anybody else, because he was just the cool shred guy with the fancy guitar up there jamming with Marty Friedman, and he was, for the time, it was 93, 94. It was after the whole Nirvana grunge era kind of put the kibosh on shred guitar stuff, I guess, in the mainstream. But all the metal kids that were there at the workshop, just really thought the world of Terry. And I was so excited when I finally had a chance to take one of his classes, and then subsequently, got to know him and be friends with him when I was an intern there and teaching my own classes. Terry is just, a wonderful guy, an amazing guitar player, and it was awesome to touch base with him again. And specifically, I wanted to talk to him because he just released a new record called Story, which came out in December. And, I wanted to, pick his brain on it because he had a lot of cool guest musicians. And I thought it was a very interesting concept for an instrumental guitar record where it's framed as a story. It's framed as kind of like a children's story. And he, got narration done by the awesome actor Keith Zeresbaka, I believe. I think that's how you pronounce it. Who, was on Angel, that's where I got introduced to him. And yeah, it was a good time to catch up with him, see how things are going, and to hear him talk about the new record. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about, the shred life, man. Terry came up in the 80s, and so, he lived through that first wave of, big-time guitar heroes, Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, all the way through to the end of the 80s and all the Shrapnel Records guys. And so I wanted to kind of get his perspective on it a little bit. So we delved into that a little bit. And you'll hear stories about, kind of the vibrant tape trading scene around shred guitar that was kind of happening in the late 80s and early 90s. So anyway, it was awesome to get a chance to talk with Terry again, and I really hope you enjoy this interview. And let me play you a track from his new record, Story, and this track is called The Perilous Flight from Castle Abathria.
Yeah, the album is has been kind of the biggest, I guess, musical endeavor. But yeah, I mean, just it's of course winter here on the I'm not really on the East Coast, but I'm close to it. So just trying to survive that thing that happens every year on this side
Yep.
of the world. Freezing cold, and snow and all that. Yeah, nothing, incredibly exciting. Just go. Everybody just got over being sick, so I don't know if it was COVID. I don't know what it was.
Yeah,
But didn't I actually didn't get tested. I probably should have, but I stayed in the house. I secured myself, and
that's fine.
just in the event. You know,
Well, good. I'm glad. I feel like that's the start of everybody's conversation now. Is is
yeah,
your
COVID,
family
right?
okay? Are you
Yeah, how you
healthy?
doing, everybody? Yeah,
um, and
absolutely.
have you been able to? Uh, I know teaching is a big thing for you. Were you able to adapt teaching to kind of make it through, like switching to like Zoom lessons and everything like that?
Yeah, that's what I've had to do at least, because I haven't had anybody at the house here for well, I mean, I guess years at this point. When COVID really hit hard, I had to stop all students. I had gone to a couple people's places and then had a bunch of people coming here, or whatever, and it was like, so definitely lost students because of that. But I just had to switch whoever I could over to to Skype or Zoom or whatever.
Okay.
Um, yeah, honestly, it's not, I mean, it's of course never as good as being in person, but I think it's a reasonable facsimile. It's not
Yes.
a bad, it's not a
Yeah. Well,
bad.
I'm glad to at least be able to talk to you face to face.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Because I haven't
Absolutely.
haven't seen you in person in years, so
It's been a long time since Table of Shadows, man.
yes. Shadows.
Long time.
And so I guess the first thing is the biggest thing is the new record, which came out in
Hmm.
December.
Yeah.
And where to start with it? I was listening to it. I love it. It's
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you.
Um, I guess what was the kind of inspiration for it? Did you have because I know you're always working on material, but like when did you kind of think, okay, well, let's try to frame this in some sort of story, like
Right.
fashion? Was that always the intention, or was it just developed over time?
I don't think it was the intention at first. Like I did an album. I think I released it back in 2012. It's called Machine Elves, and it was
Hmm.
more of a vocal, band oriented kind of thing. And I mean, whatever. It's when as somebody that writes music and everything, it's like you sort of constantly, like, as you sort of are immersed in this world and you do these things, like you're always kind of like, well, I want to do something different, and so you go to this world. It's like the constant swing between the Apollonian and Dionysian, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a pendulum that goes back and forth where So as I'm doing the vocal thing and that, I was kind of like, yeah, I'd like to write some wacky instrumental things. I haven't done that in a while or whatever. So I had written a tune, and I was kind of like in that direction, that kind of stuff, like whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of fun, it's whatever. And then I started to get some more ideas based on that. And long story short, I mean, it just sort of turned into this thing where I was like, started to write these really wacky guitar instrumentals, and the spirit of them was the thing I think that became apparent. Like it was like this. I can't really even describe it, but it reminded me of like this whimsical children's story kind of thing almost.
Hmm.
And then as soon as that thought occurred to me, like I had these like two little creatures that appeared in my head. And I'm like, wow, yeah, what happened? Like this sounds like the soundtrack, like,
Yeah.
this song and, these ideas, like what would happen if so I kind of started to write this music, and then, one thing led to another. I don't know that it was necessarily like I had the whole story in my head and then I wrote the music. It was sort of a combination of like, I had these ideas and this one tune that inspired it. And then, along the way, like it would kind of like, it would sort of be like one thing would help the other. At some point I would get stuck in the writing and I would say, what would they do next? Like, where are these guys going next? Like what happens? And I'd be like, oh, and it's this. And the ideas would come to me, or I might get an idea musically and I would say, okay, this would fit into the story like this way, whatever. So So it all sort of just, I don't know, it was weird. It just kind of happened after, I guess, a point of time. What's that initial thing, of like, this is
Yeah.
what it's going to be, and then it just took off from that point.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And and you kind of assembled like a who's who of amazing musicians to kind of help you out with it. So was that just kind of like, oh well, let's see who I can get to help bring this to life really well? Because I mean, you got Marco on drums, you got Brian on the bass. Was that kind of, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting story, I guess, in and of itself. And the briefest version is that there were a couple of things that happened simultaneously. One was, Lale Larson, who played keys on it, I've been friends with for many years, and we just never really gotten a chance to do anything. So this initially was started out as sort of a Rush kind of situation, like where you have a rock band and then you have like some minimal, keyboards or whatever. And so I thought, well, I'll get Lale to do, solo if he wants to, because that would be awesome because we haven't got a chance to do anything. So I reached out to him, and he said, like, yeah, I'll definitely do a solo. So that was cool. So we got Lale on board. But as soon as the stuff started to really happen, and the spirit of this thing, as I'm talking about, I mean, honestly, for me, it was very clear. Like there was only one drummer. I'm like, and that's usually where I start with most of the stuff. Is like I do the drums first. I think of the drummer first. It's always from this rhythmic standpoint, and then everything else. And I'm like, it's got to be Marco Miniman. I don't know him, but I know a lot of people that do know him, and I really, I hope he wants to do it. Like whatever. I don't know. I figured, like, how am I ever going to get him to do anything? So I'm like, it's got to be Marco. So I'm like, okay. So I tried to figure out how to get Marco on board. I reached out to all my my contacts. Excuse me, I'm getting over this sickness. And then pretty much parallel to that thought was, like, well, I mean, Marco plays with Brian Beller, and I'm looking for a bass player for this as well. Brian is a guy that I knew from Berkeley, and he's also a guy that I really wanted to do some stuff with. We never really got a chance to do anything together at Berkeley. Strangely enough, we had a mutual friend in this guy, Joe Travers, who was a phenomenal drummer. He ended up playing in Dweezil Zappa's band, amongst a bunch of other stuff. So I was like, well, man, Brian, I mean, it was just weird, like, all these sort of things, like, just kind of like carried the momentum forward. I'm like, I got to talk to Brian. I mean, Brian would be the perfect guy for this. This would be awesome. So reached out to Brian, reached out to Lale, reached out to Marco. So all these people basically it's not like, I never really wanted to set out and be like, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of like people with names to play on this thing or whatever.
Right.
I don't really care, to be honest with you. I want people that have some connection with and are the right people to do the thing, and that's basically how it started, and unfortunately everybody said yes at that point. So, so they got on board.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm the same way. Like I'll have in my head, I'm like, you know what? I should try to, find, even for the podcast. Like I was just like thinking the other day, like, oh, who would I love to interview? And like, you think big. You're like, well, I would like this guy on the podcast, or I'd like this guy to play on my thing. But how do I, you play that there? Like, yeah. Who do I know? Who do I know that I can find, contacts with? And I think like, and then you see somebody who has like a really cool like person like show up on their album, and you're like, well, if they could do it, I mean, I could.
Why not? It's possible.
Yeah. And then I think the thing we forget about, or at least I forget about, is I'm like, well, a lot of these guys aren't touring at the moment, and are probably looking for any kind of freelance work that they could do to
speaking of COVID, I mean, that's definitely a pretty big helper, let's say, and there are a lot of like not positive COVID stories, but one positive COVID thing I think is that we're all writing a lot of music, and everybody needs to sort of connect with everybody else to like make that stuff happen. So now's a good time, when people aren't on tour, or, looking for different things to do. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really positive.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
And and I just keep telling myself, I'm like, the worst someone can say is no.
yeah,
Like, it's not dickish of me to like feel like, hi, Mr. Famous Musician, can you show up on
yeah.
my like the most I'll say is just like, who the fuck are you? No.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's absolutely right. And I mean, to that point, like I was terrified. I mean, I knew Lale, so that was okay. And I, I knew Brian from Berkeley. I didn't know Marco at all. And then some of these other guys, when I tried to get Keith, who was the guy that narrated the thing. I mean, that was completely weird for me because he's not saying he's a huge actor, but I mean he's pretty significant. I mean he's done Batman movies and some of the Star Wars cartoons and like millions of video games. Like I mean he's a pretty significant dude and he's fantastic. I mean he's a great actor. And so I'm like I was playing World of Warcraft one night.
As you do.
And yeah, here's talking about your album. Like there's something you probably don't hear often when interviewing people about their albums. So I'm playing World of Warcraft, and there's a character in there, and I'm thinking to myself like, I got to get somebody to narrate this because I narrated the original thing, and I was like, yeah, I just like it's got some kind of like cringe factor to me. Like I need some something good. I'm like, hey, maybe who am I gonna get to narrate this? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I mean, so a bunch of names are going through my head. And I'm playing World of Warcraft, and this character that I keep seeing in this one place keeps coming up, and I'm like, it was like this moment of like the choir of angels, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm like, that's the guy. I'm like, that voice is freaking amazing, like, and then of course, like like you said, you're like, well, how am I gonna like, come on, like seriously,
Yeah.
this guy's like probably a huge voice actor and whatever. So I'm like, I'll look him up, So I looked him up, and sure enough, I mean, he's done like Hollywood stuff. He was in Transformers, he was, like whatever. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. Hey, I've got this guitar instrumental album, and would you like to? So, but again, long story short, it's like I was like, well, if you don't try,
You don't.
what's he gonna say? No,
Yeah.
or he's not gonna write back. So okay, so then we'll go on to the next. But he's definitely the dude that I want to do this. So I was like, okay, and it helped me that night actually too, because I was sitting here at the keyboard, like I was just ready to email Keith, because I found him on Facebook. I was like, well, he's got Facebook. I'll just email him there. And you're like,
Yeah.
whatever. Props to the modern technology for allowing us to connect to the gods, I guess. And Marco just sent me an email, like because I was like, I can't email Keith, like I can't do this, like he's gonna say no, and I'm gonna be crushed, and like whatever. And then Marco just sent an email, and I'm like, I got an email from Marco Miniman. I can do anything. So I sent Keith the email, it was like inspiring. I'm like, I'm talking to Marco Miniman, like whatever. So like, so that helped me to like reach out to Keith, and then Keith, strangely enough, after I tried to pitch it to him, he's like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. I was like,
Oh, that's cool.
okay, all right.
Well, I was gonna ask about Keith anyway, because it's kind of weird the way things intersect. So I knew Keith originally because he was an Angel.
Yes,
And
that's right.
I loved his character in Angel, like years ago. And so I guess like one of the biggest things for COVID for me and my wife was we started this before COVID, but with nothing else to do, we just kind of found ourselves going through TV shows, like
Mhm.
as you do, and we went through all the Star Treks, and we were
Mhm.
just going through all the Star Treks, and we got to Enterprise, and sure enough, there's Keith in an episode of Enterprise, and I honestly, one thing I noticed is I was like, especially with like Star Trek or like those kind of or Babylon 5 or any of those kind of
Mhm.
shows where the actors aren't like at a super high Hollywood level, but
Mhm.
and you hear things and you're like, he would be a great narrator for a record. And I actually
Yeah,
thought that about Keith. I'm like, I bet you he
that's
would be a
funny.
great narrator for.
That's
And
funny.
it was like him, and then the other one I was like, Tony Todd would be like the ultimate
Yeah.
narrator. I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, I don't know how you get Tony and I even think I posted about it on Facebook. I'm like, how has no one used Tony Todd yet to narrate their record?
That's well, it's just interesting because I mean, there are people like that you hear that I mean just really resonate, I guess, with you.
Yeah.
And so you'd imagine like, wow, I mean, this guy would be the dude, you know? And that for
Yeah.
me, like Keith, that was Keith, you know, like I heard the voice and I was just like, man, I mean, he's amazing. He could literally read the phone book,
Yeah.
you know, and I'd be like, wow, you know, that's great,
Yeah.
you know?
Well,
So
I think too, like you think of what's his name? Arjun from Arion
mhm,
and all that, you know, like I mean he's a nerdy metal guy too, and he's gotten like Rutger Hauer to
yeah,
narrate his things and John Delancey, you know, it's just like, you know, all these guys again who are again, you know, you're not it's not like you're asking Brad Pitt to come in and narrate your record, but you know, you find
yeah.
these really cool actors out there.
Well, the interesting thing is too, you know, and I can't really, you know, speak to Keith because I don't know that he's really into to prog guitar,
Yeah.
you know, stuff or whatever. But some of these guys, you know, like Christopher Lee was a huge metal dude.
Yeah.
He actually put out a metal album.
I know.
And so like, you know, he's done like I think he ended up doing the Rhapsody, all the narrative stuff for the guys in
Yeah.
Rhapsody or whatever, or Rhapsody of Fire, I think they were named back then, or I can't remember how that
Yeah.
name thing went. But had no idea about any of that stuff, you know, until like somebody showed me, and he's like, you know, he's like got the full like medieval metal, like, you know, Saruman the White gear on and stuff, you know, and like he's totally. I'm like, so you never know. I mean, I
You
would
know,
never in a
yeah.
million years be like, you know, I mean, you know, like I'm going to get Christopher Lee on out, you know, like something like that. But I mean, somebody that's that into that stuff, you never know who is and who's not. You know, you could approach them and just be like, look, you know, I got this thing, and they, you know,
Yeah.
somebody of that stature could be like, I love it, let's do this. And then
Well,
it's like, wow, okay,
it's funny you bring that up too, because as a Rhapsody fan,
yes,
uh the one of the biggest complaints about Rhapsody was the terrible narration on their early records, because
mm,
I think it's kind of like you said, like, you know, like, well, I guess I'll do it, you know, you start off thinking, okay, I guess I have to do this,
yeah,
and I think I think the singer of the band was the narrator on the first two records, and he had this terrible lisp.
yeah,
And it's just like you'd have this really cool, because you know, of all the power metal bands, I thought Rhapsody was a little bit more interesting in terms of their arrangements and stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's a
sure,
cool track, and then this terrible narrator coming in was like, I'm like,
yeah.
why?
I mean,
Just
that, you know,
pay the
I have
money.
I have learned that you know, you have to if you're really serious about your project or your music or whatever, I mean, you have to really treat it with respect in every single aspect that you
Mhm.
possibly can. I mean, obviously, you know, everybody's not made of money or everybody's not doesn't have the connection or you know whatever the case is, but that's basically where it was, you know, with the Keith thing for me. I was like, you know, it was kind of cringy, you know, when I heard it myself doing it. I'm like, I just don't. It needs to be like I worked hard on everything else. Like, why would I just drop the ball here on this? You
Oh
know,
yeah,
and it
yeah,
makes a huge difference. Narration, I mean, is absolutely integral to if you're going to do that type of thing.
yeah,
Absolutely integral.
and it
You know.
works, man. I love Keith's narration. I think it fits perfectly with the music, and
Thanks. Yeah, I think
you know,
he's brilliant, man. He really is.
and is that your son who's the narrator, or sorry,
Yeah, it's
the
my
child?
son doing one of the little characters. Yeah, yeah,
I know it wasn't in the credits, but I just kind of
yeah. You know, I didn't really want to be because I don't really like I don't know when people put their wives and kids and all that kind of stuff on their you know, that to me I like to keep that separate or whatever, but it just seemed like a natural thing to have, you know, to have him do that. So I wanted the character to be a character and not my son,
yeah.
but yes, but Luke, you know, he did it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
Well, it's cool because I mean, I do think because you get the right energy from him. I mean, in terms of like, you know, like what the character is supposed to be, you know, because yeah, it's just like this adventure, but it's also got this like, you know, like sense of wonderment and whimsy, like you were saying, and just like
yeah,
it comes through in the performance. So
good. Yeah, you know, I wanted that to be authentic. I mean, in the case of the kid, you know, the kid's voice, you know, I mean, again, you could hire somebody to do that or whatever, but there was just something really, you know, authentic about having him be goofy and all that kind of stuff for this little character, you know. So that part of it felt right and good, you know, to do.
Cool.
Because he's not. I mean, there's no. That's exactly what I wanted to have happen. Like, there's no like, okay, now I'm going to do this voice and I'm going to do that. It's just like he's in front of this mic, and he was the hardest one to produce on this whole thing because he's just like doing all this goofy stuff. Like he's amazed that there's a microphone and he hears his voice and all that kind of stuff. So. With everybody else, it's like, nah, in Measure 32, like we need to take that fill out, or whatever. With Keith, I'm like, can we get a little more, whimsical and like whatever. But Luke's like, and he's like all over the place.
Running around.
I'm like, dude, okay, settle down. We need to take just say this, So, yeah, it was the hardest one, I think.
That's amazing. And so, I mean, where was I going to go next? So in addition to this, because I know, like you said, it had been 2012 was the previous record, and then this one. I mean, do you have any other projects that you have in the works? Or obviously COVID probably got in the way of some of them, but did you have any like live band things coming up or anything that?
No, not really. Nothing live in a while, because it's just been, I mean, I've been teaching, I guess has been, the biggest thing. And then, of course, writing music and all that business. So, and between, that and honestly, like, the day to day, like, family stuff of taking care of, kids and all that completely non-metal kind of stuff. It's full time. So, my music is like, I when I can, I come down and I write and, do all that kind of stuff. So I'm happy that I was able to have enough time to get this thing, get this thing together.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say too, from a gear perspective, in the promo photos I'm not seeing pointy guitars. Have you moved on?
No, I can never move on from pointy guitars. I still have my I don't know if you can't see my V back there, but I have my blue Jackson V that I always play. And I did that on I started off with the blue V for most of it. Like the first tune I think I tracked, and then some of the next things. And then I had just gotten this guy, the Charvel, probably just a little bit before I think I started working on tracking, and I plugged it in one night just to check it out, and I was like, man, this is like, it's amazing. Like there's no, like with all my other guitars, like I've never been great at like setting anything up. So I kind of do my own like quick, ghetto version of whatever. But there's stuff that happens like where I'll be going up for the high note and I'll hit it and it like dies, like, I'm like, because it's just not really set up fantastically, and I don't really, have a go-to person that does that stuff anymore. So, so the Charvel, literally when I got the thing, I pulled it out of the box and it was in tune and I played it and I was like, this is freaking amazing. And I haven't done anything to it since. Like I've not tweaked it. I've not changed anything. I've not whatever. And it still plays amazingly. There's no dead spots on the neck. It's like, so I'm like, well, I think I'm going to use this because, the notes aren't dying. They're not, So it ended up being the Charvel for most all of the leads and melodies and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I actually just hold on, if I can, because God damn it. for my doom metal band, we started playing in 7 strings, and nice. I hadn't owned a 7-string in years, so I bought this Jackson because it was on special or whatever. And
that's awesome.
And I was like, well, first of all, I was like, whoa, I finally have a Jackson. But again, I was amazed. Like I took it out of the box, it was perfectly in tune, and I didn't change the strings for a year because I didn't want to mess with it, because I'm like for some reason it was like, and I was like using the Floyd, and obviously like over years, you're like, oh, Floyd's can be a little annoying. I was like, it's working, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And I'm like, I've never had a Floyd that's done what it's supposed to do. I'm like, this is why people love them. And I was like, oh, I'm like, oh, if you get one that's set up right,
Right.
then you don't have to worry about it.
It's amazing what a good setup we'll do for a guitar. And I like I said, I've every once in a great while I've had somebody that has done something, and it lasts for X amount of time until the seasons change, and the wood grows and shrinks and all that business, and then all of a sudden, like, my guitar is completely whacked again. Of course,
Yep.
the frets start to die after a while. That's why, I mean, that's another reason I love this thing, is because it's got stainless steel in it. So I will never buy another guitar without stainless steel. They're it's an amazing thing. So yeah, I mean, the setup is makes such a, and it's like, it's inspiring, right? Like when you play your guitar and the notes are all clear, or your trem's all working like the way it's supposed to be, it stays in tune. It's like, yeah, man, like I want to play this, I want to make music, as opposed to like I said, when I was on my other guitar, I'm playing and the notes are dying, and I'm like, God, like you're trying to sustain a note, and like as soon as you vibrato, like you start hearing the fret rub. It's like, like, oh God, like I can't, I can't let that go. Like, what am I gonna do?
Yeah. Well, it's did you ever see that the documentary, that It Might Get Loud documentary with
Yes.
Jack White and
Yeah, Jimmy Page, yeah.
And I think it's in that where Jack White was talking about, like, well, no, I want me and my guitar to be in a fight. Like, I want to fight to get the music out of the guitar. I'm like, why? I'm like, why? Isn't it nice when it's effortless? I mean,
yeah, I don't want to fight, man. I want peace and love on my guitar. I want my guitar to be like, look, let me help you out.
Yeah. But
okay.
And one other thing, so it's in a state of disrepair right now. It doesn't have a neck because I'm changing the necks on it. But I wanted to point out, I made myself a flying V.
Oh yeah, man.
And I wanted to let you know that you were half of the influence for this, because I first said, when I was painting it, I was like, I originally said, okay, well, I like the Michael Schenker thing, like but I'm like, but I don't want black and white. And then I was like, oh yeah, Terry had the purple and green. So I was like, yeah, why not just do whatever colors you want? They don't have to be black. So there you go. That's half of a tribute to you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that the Lucky Stripe guitar this was inspirational.
Yeah. Although it's very rounded, though. The edges are rounded. It's not, you can't impale anybody on it, unfortunately.
There's that. No pointy headstock. Pointy headstock on it.
I just want to jump in to say thank you for listening, and here are the ways that you can support us. Subscribe to The Color of Air on your favorite podcast app, like Apple, Stitcher, Radio Public, or Spotify, and be sure to rate and review. Also, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/retcongreg. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/Ret Con Industries, where we have 3 monthly subscription tiers of $1, $5, and $10. Depending on which tier you choose, you will have your name listed in the credits for every future podcast and music release, as well as access to bonus audio and video content, Bandcamp discounts, and exclusive merchandise through the Ret Con Swag Club. Finally, please check out all the music up for sale at retconindustries.bandcamp.com. And now, back to the podcast. So what I was trying to do is assemble some interviews around I don't want to say shred, because it's not just about shred, but for instance, like I was talking to a younger musician who's like who I was blown away, because he was like, he talks about his love for like all of like the Shrapnel guys, and all of that. I'm like, really? And then I guess things are kind of cyclical, obviously, because it's like, well, I mean, and I know, it's like the 90s came, and then all of a sudden Shrapnel was just like that, like one page in Guitar for the Practicing Musician that you like, fill out to mail order stuff, and everyone's like, we don't want guitar solos.
It got Nirvana'd.
It got Nirvana'd, But then I feel like it's kind of come back around again, because I feel like there's a whole new crop of like really, not just technically proficient, but just guys who are, and girls who are trying to, push that further. And so it's just
Mhm.
kind of curious from your perspective, like who have you seen out there that you've found to be kind of, you know, inspiring, or at least, pushing the stuff forward?
I don't know, man. I know, you know, I know like so a lot of these guys, I mean, they use like their internet code names or whatever. So like I don't even know. I can't say like, hey, it's George Lynch or it's
Yeah, yeah,
whatever. It's like, Doobie157, it's like, oh, he's amazing, like
yeah.
you can't, so I don't know. That's just a testament to my age, I guess, one of the many testaments to my age. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I've seen people like, I'm actually like a relatively newcomer to Instagram because I didn't have that whole thing set up for a long time. And then people were like, dude, you got to get on Instagram. So I'm like, okay. So now that I'm on there, stuff comes up my feed all the time where I see these dudes play or whatever. And in general, I mean, there's some really, I mean, as far as the the technical level of the stuff, I mean, it's definitely amazing. Like I don't know, stuff that like you wouldn't even imagine could happen on a guitar. It's very computer like or whatever. Um, so I mean, I think that's great. I love the fact that a lot of these young people are like trying to um, they're really excited about that stuff. Like they're really interested. It's like it reminds me of a little bit of like back in the 80s and some of the 90s, like the very first part of it, um, where we had Spotlight column in Guitar Player magazine. It was kind of a central piece to like a lot of the stuff around the world, and then you'd be in Spotlight or you'd see somebody in Spotlight, and then like you could do it in the old fashioned way of sending demo tapes through the mail, and that would go all over the place, and people would write each other and whatever. But there was a whole scene, that was going on, and it was really exciting. Like every month you go and check out Spotlight, and there'd be like a new person in there or whatever, and you'd be like, oh, and like Mike Varney would give him a great write up or something, and say, oh, this guy is like so technical and he's crazy, And so then like for me, I'd write him, I'd be like, hey, saw you in Spotlight, could you send a demo and whatever. And so I got so many demo tapes from players, and then subsequently, like when you'd have your friends, they would do the same thing, and so like you'd exchange all these, like have you heard this guy, and you're like, oh no, I haven't heard him yet, and then it was just a really exciting time to be alive, I think, for guitar, for that style of guitar, because it was so vibrant and so many people around the globe just participating, whatever. So say what you will about the wank factor and the cheese factor, and I totally would probably agree with most people for a lot a lot of it. But there's something really cool about it, as well. So I see a similarity to that type of thing now with a lot of these dudes like on Instagram, where it's like they're just putting this thing up. This guy's putting this thing. This guy's putting this thing, or whatever. So that part of it, I think, is really cool and exciting, and it's great to see that people that are whatever. I mean, young people coming up. I mean, are like they're totally enthused about that stuff.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and the results are really amazing. Like I've watched some of these people play, and I'm like, geez, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you say like it, because I always kind of associate the tape trading stuff with like the metal scene of the 80s, like the
And that too,
early
yes,
80s.
yeah.
But I didn't realize it was as, like you said, as vibrant within the guitar community, man. But that makes sense. Yeah, because I remember the Spotlight column. I mean, I remember
Yep.
when John Petrucci was featured in a Spotlight column or something like that.
Everybody was, man. Everybody. Anybody that has been anybody, like Ingve was in Spotlight, Paul Gilbert was in Spotlight, Tony McAlpine, Vinnie Moore, Greg Howe. I mean, all the names of the Shrapnel guys, and then, Marty Friedman, Jason Becker, those guys that have gone on, Marty, of course, to do, Megadeth and some other, bigger bands and whatnot. I mean, that was the, like I said, the ground zero. It was like the starting place,
Yeah.
So that was really, as I said before, terribly exciting, I guess, for the time. It's always cool to see who was going to be in there in the next month, and you know, try to
Yeah.
call
It and one thing, I mean, again, whatever. I'm not, what I'm not sure what you've heard from different bands and whatnot, but one thing I've kind of noticed is because I kind of like I said, it's like cyclical, and I was noticing, in kind of the early mid 2000s when you had like when the kind of the creeds and all that kind of died down a little bit, and you had like your Avenged Sevenfold or Trivium or these other bands that just kind of like had got some sort of momentum going, and like you saw that these guys were like shredding and like, or at least like really kind of emphasizing the guitar stuff on it,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh cool, it's coming back. That's kind of fun.
Mhm.
And but I feel like there's a lot of people, and I see this a lot too, just from like a metal perspective, because my band, like I hear about all these like traditional heavy metal band, like the new wave of traditional heavy metal is what they call it,
Wow.
and it's like bands who are trying to recreate the vibe of the 80s, like they dress in the jeans and the white sneakers and the
Yeah.
vests and the bullet belts and everything like that, and they
Sure.
try to make their records sound like the 80s.
Mhm.
And I think some of the guitar players try to bring that into their playing, where they're like, oh, I'm gonna do the shred, and I feel like they miss the point. It's like they
Yeah.
like they're copying it, or not necessarily copy, but they're trying to make an approximation of it without realizing that. And like there's a reason why 80s metal records sounded the way they did. It was
Yeah.
because that's the way production was at the time.
Sure.
um and so trying to recreate that, I don't know, I feel like there's like, but there are some people who kind of like come up and are very good, and I find very inspiring. But when I go back and I listen to, like, even listen to some of the hair metal bands and the guitar players from those bands, as
Mhm.
cheesy as they were, like they all kind of like played really well. And like, I don't know, the well, some of them, some I'm like, but CC DeVille, but some of them, like, I don't know, like I felt like there was like people really cared about, the guitar players really cared. I mean, whether it's they wanted to get the girl or like show off in front of people, but they really did put time and care into what they were playing.
Yeah.
Whereas
No,
I think,
absolutely, man.
yeah,
Absolutely. I think it like and I mean that's a testament to the technology, I think, because you know now it's pretty easy to make a certain sound, I mean, literally through drag and drop, or like some of these, there was a whole thing that was going on about, I don't know if you saw it, about like, fast guitar playing and these guys using Guitar Pro and like creating all this stuff through Guitar Pro and making it sound like guitars and then miming it and, like whatever. So like the point is that you can literally make the sound happen. Whereas like, in 1980, like you couldn't make that sound happen unless you actually did it.
hmm
So it was an analog world back then. And so you had to actually get your hands on the thing and create the thing and and do the thing. Like you couldn't use a computer to generate like, whatever. So I think that has a huge thing to do, with it. And to that point, that you were making, like I actually go back and listen to like a lot of the stuff that I absolutely hated in the 70s or the 80s, like disco and synth pop and stuff like that. Like back then, I mean, for me, it was like, anybody that was like, yeah, I'm into like, The Cure or whatever. I was like, oh, dude, like, that's not metal. Like, there's no, it's not, like you had to have this identity. I don't know if it's that horrible for you or whatever, but for me, it was like you had to have the identity. You had the black, jacket and the spikes, and like I'm in the Maiden, man. That's what it is. And but now I go back and listen to that stuff, and I'm like, man, this is fucking amazing. Like this is
yeah,
really great stuff
yeah,
because it's real. There's a realness to it. Even the synth pop stuff of the 80s, they're still creating. There's still, there's a realness to it. There's songwriting that's going on. There's an emotional content to it. The disco stuff in the 70s, it was like, oh God, come on, man. Now I listen to it, I'm like, holy crap, man, that rhythm section is unbelievable, man. That the bass and oh geez, like, so I don't know, maybe it's rose colored glasses or whatever, but
yeah.
there's something about like going back and listening to the original stuff that happened during those time periods, and there's an authenticity to it, and and minimally there's musicianship
Yeah.
that can be appreciated, because they had to
Oh,
do it.
yeah. I remember having this discussion with somebody where I was just like, because now we live in the age where you can go on YouTube and get isolated tracks of
Yeah.
different things.
Yep.
And you listen to, I mean, I remember growing up, my sisters were into Duran Duran, and
Sure.
I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
and but when you listen to the isolated bass tracks
Yeah.
of that guy, like that dude, like we're talking like serious chops, and
Yeah.
like and I even think like I remember like the one guy from Kajagoogoo. I
Sure.
remember this. He teaches at like a musicians institute kind of thing in England or
Yeah.
whatever. But like and he again like yeah the especially the bass players,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because if you're trying to get people to dance, you need the drums and the.
Sure. That's
I
that's got
mean,
to happen. Yeah.
there's a lot of drum
Yeah.
machine, but still like
No, I mean you're absolutely right, man. It's like, a lot of those cats, like what's his name, Mark King from Level 42, was another one of those guys that you just, like you listen to him, you're like, holy crap, man. Cat
yeah,
can ball.
yeah.
Jeez.
So
um,
yeah, no, I was the same way too. I think I was kind of like, which was kind of weird because it was in the middle of the 90s, and I was just kind of just like trying to be like Maiden and blah blah, and it's just like everyone's like REM and
yeah,
which is not to say those bands again, those like there are some good music that kind of came out of that era and everything like that, but it's just like
yeah.
yeah, you kind of get into that identity, and then you at a certain point you're like, fuck, I'm too old to keep this shit keep an
I
identity
mean,
and
for
like
sure, man. And then I think you have like the foil of, modern music where you hear it and you look at it and it's just so, not to make a sweeping generalization, but I will. But a lot of it is, like I said, there's a different spirit that drives it. I mean, it's very, you know, uh, producer heavy, like where you drag and drop things and you create tracks and all this kind of stuff. And there's not, there can be artistry in that for sure. I like I mean, the analogy of like a Pink Floyd, where they took a lot of the technology of the time, and made some really musical stuff, happen from that. I think that it's potential for that same dynamic to happen, can happen now and does happen now.
hmm
But, there's a lot of pop oriented kind of stuff, let's say, where, it's basically just that. I mean, they get somebody, they produce them, they tune everything, they time correct everything, they, squash everything in the mix. They like
yeah,
everything about it. It's like, produced and homogenized, to some level. And
yeah. I
it's just kind of a drag, it's kind of a
Yeah.
drag.
Well, and I remember that too because the studio that I recorded at a bunch in the 2000s. It's weird saying that because it's almost 20 years ago now, but
Right.
but but the studio that I got, that we recorded at, even though they eventually kind of got big because one of the producers there um was in Kill Switch Engage,
Right on.
who got very big, and
Mhm.
it was funny like watching how the studio changed when like from the way we recorded there originally to
Mhm.
after like all these kind of changes. And I remember talking to one of the engineers there, and he was telling me how they did it, how they do it, and the way, again, it was like the it was based on the producer, even for like
Mhm.
the metal bands. It was just kind of like um and it was like, yeah, they would obviously everything would be like synced up to the grid totally, like perfectly on time and everything like that, drums replaced and everything, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And then he was like, yeah, the guitar players basically would tune their guitars, play a measure, stop, retune, play the next measure, and just chop it like that.
Yeah.
And I think like I was like, wow, I don't want to ever record like that. A, that's a
Yeah.
lot more work than I want to put into it, and B, like it takes away like the sometimes you do have to like do edits and all that other stuff, but yeah, I try not to get that meticulous to it where everything has to be kind of. And then he said once you have a good solid verse and a good solid chorus, you copy paste. And I was just like,
Sure.
what?
I think it's like it's almost a different art form if you
Yeah.
want to use that adjective for it because it'd be like the difference between a person that paints in oils or something and a person that does collage art. You know what I mean? It's like it's a totally different thing, and it depending on the thing that its intent is for. I mean, it can be a cool thing. Like if you're a producer, like I said, and there's a way that you put things together for a specific thing. There's an artistry in it.
Yeah.
But as a musician and, like yourself as a recording person and person that actually plays the stuff and writes the stuff and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a very suffocating, limiting thing, that just, to me, it just, ruins the whole process because it's something totally different.
Yeah.
It's not what you would do or what I would do or whatever. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that things, and it's not to say like whatever, I haven't edited things or I haven't done this or whatever, but in general, I mean, if I can't play it or, um, you know, it, it's not organic in the song or something like that, then I mean, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just do something else.
Yeah.
You
Well, when you mentioned the Guitar Pro thing, it also reminded me. So one of the things I did when I was kind of bored during the pandemic at work, well, working on my couch, was I grabbed my guitar, I put it in an alternate tuning, and I just started doing these like string skipping kind of exercises and I was just developing them melodically, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And so then I said, well, I don't want to forget this, let me put it into Guitar Pro. And then I started then composing in Guitar Pro with it and just being like, oh, this would work, and this fingering, blah blah blah. And now I have this like etude that's like, it like, I don't know, like a minute and a half long or something like that, and I can't play it. but but it sounds good on the Guitar Pro. I wouldn't release that and say it's me, but like I'm just like, god damn it, I wrote something really cool, but I can't play it.
Well, but there's something cool about like that. So that's an example of like using the technology, I think, to arrive at something musical because you had an idea, you did it, and then you put it into that, and you extended the idea, and then hopefully you'll take that and practice it, to the point where maybe you
I
will
hope
play
so.
it. Yeah, but the possibility is there. You know what I mean? So like it's this kind of cool version of like give and take with the technology. Like
Yeah.
you're working with it like as a tool, as opposed to like, well, I'm just going to play this and put it in there, and then that's what it is, or that's a
Yeah.
totally different thing.
I think what it comes down to is I have to remember that I have terrible practice habits, Terry. I always have. My practice.
Is this a confessional, Greg?
Yeah. Well, yeah,
All right, 10 Hail Marys and
no, it's not something you should tell a guitar teacher. Yeah, I don't practice. What?
Yeah.
God damn it. But anyway, well, one thing I was going to ask too, again, because I was talking to this other guy about his favorite shrapnel guys and shred guys, and I feel like that there's like the players everybody knows from the time period, and they like despite whatever happened in the music industry, like people still know Paul Gilbert, Tony McAlpine, like I said, Greg Howe, Vinnie Moore, Frank Gambale, not that he's a shrapnel guy, but Alan Holdsworth, like all these guys.
Sure.
When you were kind of in the middle of like doing the tape trading thing and whatever, what are some guys from that era that a lot of people don't know, like some guys who are like really good, but just due to the fact of how many people were involved, just maybe never got.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, some of the really good demos that I got. Again, this is like so many years ago. I probably can't even remember this stuff properly, but I know. Well, I mean, one guy that stood out to me, and people kind of know him, but maybe not on the same level as Paul Gilbert, was Russ Parrish, who is, I guess, Satchel now, and what's the name of it? Is it Steel Panther?
Steel Panther.
Steel Panther. Okay.
Yeah.
But I remember getting his demo, and his playing was like on kind of another level. Like some guys you would you'd hear the demo and it would be really good, and you'd be like, wow, it's it's definitely like good or whatever. But he was I think he's probably about the same age as me. I can't remember. Like I mean, we were all like 16 or 17 at the time or whatever. But I think he was like 17 and I was 16 or something like that. And I got the demo. Why that's important is because I got it and I was like, crap, man, this guy's like the same age as me, and like, geez, like listen to that. Like it was really like crazy, amazing playing. So I remember him, and I remember there was a guy that was younger than me actually by a year. His name was Matt Prudell, I think. He lived somewhere up in like Michigan or Wisconsin or something like that. I have no idea whatever happened to him. Um, but I used to talk to him actually on the phone a bunch because he would he had a band, and he and his bass player were like this, and his bass player was in Spotlight. And at the time in my band in high school, my bass player and I were like same thing, and we used to do this completely nerdy stuff like where we would get together on Friday nights. Excuse me, Friday nights, and my parents would go out, and they would say, okay, you guys, if you want to hang out and whatever, and we'd order Pizza Hut pizza and grab a metronome and sit there and like shed like licks. So then we'd come up with a bunch of stuff we were working on for the band. We tried to do Racer X tunes, like whatever, like just crazy stuff, and we'd sit there together and do that. And so one day we called this guy Matt. We were in the middle of that or whatever. Like, let's call him, because he gave me his number and so on and so forth. So we called him up, and we were like, like, hey man, it's us, like whatever. And he's like, oh man, great to hear from you guys, whatever. And like, I was like, what are you doing, man? And he goes, I'm just sitting here eating a pizza with my bass player, man. We're like, shedding like Racer X tunes. I was like, dude. So, there was a lot of commonality, I guess, between people. But yeah, Matt was another guy. I can't even remember some of the other guys. I remember there was a guy, David Scott, I think it was his name. He was in a band called Tough Luck in Florida. And I remember him being really good, But a lot of the guys, they went on to do something at least. There was some of the 90s, early 90s, late 80s guys that sort of they might have done like a Shrapnel album, or they did some stuff for Shrapnel. My friend Rich Kern, who I think is an amazing player and writer, although I don't think he does either now. He kind of got up there a little bit. He did a compilation for Shrapnel and was kind of one of the dudes one of the guys that initially introduced me to Mike Varney. I'm trying to think of some of these other guys, man. There's always been like Ron Jazenebeck, I think is how you say his last name, from Watchtower and Spastic Inc. and that kind of stuff. He's always been one of those guys that's been like right here under the radar and just ready to break through, and should, because he's amazing.
Well, I feel like his brother
Bobby,
Bobby did more, like at least in terms of like playing with bands and in session work and stuff like that.
Right. Well, he went on he was in Halford, I think, for a while. And
Halford.
I can't remember. Yeah.
But
these guys are all there, man. They're all floating around, and they're still alive and well. Like I've some of them have friended me on Facebook or vice versa, and I've seen I think Derek Taylor was one of the guys in there. I mean, they were all sort of like spotlight guys that were amazing players, and their demos were incredible. And just whatever, they might have done a Shrapnel album, and then that's kind of where it
Yeah.
But that's that's what it is. It's not, as and I know, it's not to succeed in the music business or to have any kind of notoriety has really not a whole heck of a lot to do with your ability as much as it does your placement, your luck, and your dedication to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And I mean, stuff in life happens, man. We get families, or we get stuff to do, and so
and I mean, that's kind of been like something I've thought a lot about over the last 10 years or whatever. And it's just like, and I think nowadays too, like if you want to succeed in music, and I don't even want to say succeed in music, whatever your definition of success in music is, like,
right.
We'll just say like making music for a living, we'll say that,
Sure.
like, or having your main source of income come from something music related. And I look at guys and it's like teaching, session work,
right.
I feel like if you're gonna do it, you have to have like all these little revenue streams that kind of coalesce into
Yeah.
income, as opposed to, like, yeah, your original music is not gonna drive that. It's like everything else you
Probably
do.
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably not.
And it's just gotten weirder and weirder with, like with all the streaming stuff and,
Yeah, for
and
sure, man. And
and
like it's so, in one way that's a good thing, but in another way, the bad part of it is that it's so oversaturated
hmm
with music that first of all, it's very difficult to get yourself placed, to a place where people actually, at least in the old days. I mean, if you got to the point where you were on a label, people were going to have to deal with you on some level because, that you didn't get to a label unless a label got to you,
hmm
put you on MTV and put you here and put you there and put you wherever. And then, people would have to deal with it. And you would be one of the few that were out, in the whatever. Now it's like everybody in the world, man, can literally make stuff in their own home and put it up on YouTube. And that's the vehicle, usually YouTube or Instagram or any of these other places that people see the stuff. There's not a real radio thing anymore or television thing anymore or whatever. It's like, this is our new thing.
hmm
So
yeah.
there's so much of it that it's impossible for everybody to sift through, and because of that, subsequently, I think people's like attention spans um, for things, they're just like, okay, 30 seconds of that, yeah, that's cool. 30 seconds of that. It's not like, oh my god, I need to like, like I was saying about this the new album that we did. Like I was saying to people, and most people that have any sort of like for it, I think they can kind of resonate with it. But like back in the old days, again, the old days. Like you got an album and like you either by yourself or with your friends, like you sat around, like it was like, oh my God, the new Sabbath album is out. Okay, awesome. And you get the album and you'd look at the cover of the thing and you'd be like, dude, this is amazing, And I'm talking about like, no drugs involved. I'm talking about
Yeah.
like you just, you were like, oh my God, like I'm holding the new Black Sabbath album. This is amazing, and then, you reverently put it on the turntable, or if you had, a cassette, like whatever, and you would just sit and you would just listen to the whole thing, like you'd sit there in the room and be like, oh my God. I guess to that experience, and now it's like this 30-second jumble, like whatever that, I'm on to the next thing. I'm on to the next thing. People don't even know the names of bands or songs or whatever. It's instantaneous. They want something for 20 seconds and then, it's the next.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, maybe I should turn this podcast into old shredders come yell at clouds.
Yeah, right. There you go. You'll title this one "Get Out of My Yard."
Yeah. I literally, actually, funny enough, during the pandemic, got told by an old man to get off his lawn when I was walking my dog.
See, that's a beautiful thing though, because at least you're on this side of it still.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually had the experience where I had to like, I almost did. So maybe I'm not quite there, but there, kids were coming up into my driveway, by the cars, and I was like, hey, and I'm like, Jesus, am I that guy now? I'm like the old guy. I'm like, get out of my driveway, so.
It happens.
So I would embrace the experience of having the old man tell me, get out of my lawn.
Oh yeah,
Thank you, good sir.
Yes,
and a pleasant day to you as well.
Well, no, and I had that experience too. My wife and I, when things started opening up, we were taking little day trips here and there to go, go visit some shop in Western Mass or something, and like whatever. We stopped at this restaurant, and obviously everyone's wearing a mask, and so I get up to go use the bathroom, and I'm walking towards the bathrooms, and this lady is walking in front of me, this older lady, and she goes into the bathroom before me. So I'm like, okay, and then she closes the door, and then she opens up. She's like, "You can come in with me if you want." And I went, and I was just kind of like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, I thought you were my boyfriend." And I was just like, no, 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 no. And then now that was awkward enough, but
Yeah.
then we're sitting at the table, and she has to come over with her boyfriend to say like, "Oh, this is him, not you." And her boyfriend must have been like 60, 65 years old, and
Oh man.
I'm like, and at the time I'm like, like, I'm only 41. Like, what is
Like,
going on?
come on, man.
Like, look, come on. I know I'm in my 40s, but Jesus Christ, I'm not.
Yeah, you're cutting me deep here, lady. Come on, man. Let's, jeez.
God damn it.
Yeah, no, I welcome any opportunity for the opposite of that to happen. If I get carded at the grocery store or whatever, like, buying some beer or something, and it's like, there's like, oh, I'm sorry, I got to card you. I'm like, with pleasure.
Yeah.
How old do I look?
Yeah.
Tell me again.
Well, man, seriously, this is awesome. Thank you, Terry, for hanging out for a little bit. And
Oh, absolutely, Greg, man. I'm it's good to see you.
Ooh, look, a big